We're approaching the point in the day where we start to kind of move into the evening and think about achievements and celebrations and awards and champagne and things like that, which is sometimes the nicest bit of the day. And I've got a speech here congratulating the winners and talking about the importance of their work. It's a good speech and probably the one I ought to give, but I'm not going to. We face a time of great urgency, in my view, and potentially great turmoil in education, and further education in particular. We'll have to do more for our students with less public funding, and we know that for sure, and we've known that for some time now. We also know that the labour market in a lot of the UK is pretty tough at the moment, and productivity is low, puzzlingly low, in fact. Unemployment and youth unemployment are also low, which is a reason for celebration and optimism. But the quality of working life is an issue, I think. Underemployment has arisen as a significant issue in terms of hours of employment, in terms of underutilised skills. Young people find increasingly that career progression is more limited than it used to be, especially as demographic changes mean that over 60s are choosing to stay in the labour market for longer. And our society has seen a really significant intergenerational movement of wealth from younger people to older people. The Office of National Statistics tells us really clearly that the over 65s are now the wealthiest group in our society. Now, whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing, or neither, is a matter of opinion. But it is a fact. And it's never been a fact before. So it's not only true, it's also a new truth about our society. And yet, public policy still seems to favour older people in some really significant ways. I first noticed this when David Willetts, a Conservative MP, pointed out in his book The Pinch in 2010. The full title was actually The Pinch, How the Baby Boomers Took Their Children's Future and Why They Should Give It Back. But it's not a critique that's just confined to the right of centre and politically. Just the other week I read Nick Cohen, who's generally considered to be somewhat left of centre, describing present government's welfare policy as a capitalism for the young and socialism for the old, by which he meant a considerable protection of benefits for older people. Now, you can debate that. You can use data on either side to debate the point, but it's really common experience now that for young people, buying even a small house or a flat is a pipe dream. I travel around the country a lot visiting colleges and training providers, and it's always a privilege. I usually get a taxi from the station to the college. I always have a great conversation with the taxi driver. And this just comes up again and again and again, as it does in kind of conversations with all sorts of people. If you don't have wealthy parents, wealthy and cooperative parents, the chance of you striking out on your own is much lower than it used to be. So why am I talking about all this? What's it got to do with us and today? Well, it's because I think education is the key to this puzzle. I think education is the key to the productivity puzzle. I think especially vocational education, or if you want, professional and technical education, is the key to the productivity puzzle. Our productivity is really quite low compared to other OECD countries, and I don't think it's a coincidence that our proportion of people who have higher level vocational skills and qualifications is also low internationally. I also think it's the key to social mobility and social justice, and I think in particular further education is the key to that. And I'm not just meaning for individual learners that you work with every day. I also mean more generally in terms of society and economy. So I think it's actually a a duty almost, a chosen mission, you might say, not just to teach, but to teach really well and always to improve in what we're doing. But that brings you on to the big central issue: what makes great teaching? Now, we've been talking about this a lot and hearing about it, and I just want to talk about it a little bit more. How do you know? How do you know what makes great teaching? There's lots of people who want to give you kind of broad brush answers to that. You know, is it what's now called either kind of helpfully or disparagingly the progressive paradigm, which is a paradigm I was trained in as a teacher in the 1990s, which, you know, you could characterize as mixed ability, groupings, discovery learning, active learning, skills-based, and so on. Is it what's called either encouragingly or disparagingly traditional education, setting by ability, direct instruction, knowledge-based, and so on? Well, I think these are largely ideological debates, and they often tend to be focused pretty strongly, either explicitly or implicitly, on the speaker's own personal experience, either their personal experience as a learner or their experience as a teacher. And it can be quite debilitating, I think. So what do we do as professionals instead? Well, of course, as other speakers have been saying, we look to the evidence. And I want to just draw to your attention something that many of you will be familiar with. It's a piece of research, or meta-research really. It's called What Makes Great Teaching? And it was written by Professor Coe of Durham University, who many of you will know. He's produced some really groundbreaking work on the validity or lack of validity of graded observations in classroom observations, but also by the Sutton Trust. And if you haven't read it, I would strongly encourage you to look it up. It's quite new, October 2014. And it's a tour around the landscape of educational research, what makes great teaching. And they identify 6 factors that they think the evidence supports does indeed make a significant difference to effective teaching. And I'm not going to tell you what they are, because I really want you to read it if you haven't already. I am going to read a bit of it, though, because it's such a good piece of work. My favourite bit is round about the middle, where they give examples of ineffective practice. And I just, if you'll bear with me for a couple of minutes, I just want to share this with you. I think this is fascinating. The authors say, it may seem unduly negative to focus on things that do not work, but there are a number of reasons for wanting to do this. One is that it provides a challenge to complacency. A potential problem with lists of best practice is they can be susceptible to confirmation bias. If the list of effective practices is long enough and contains descriptions of practice that are open to a bit of interpretation, most teachers will be able to identify something they think they're doing from that list. Including examples of worst practice is likely to provoke a stronger reaction, but we hope it will be constructive. So they go on to give some examples of practices, not which are proven to be destructive, but which are not proven to be effective. There is a lack, almost complete lack of evidence for the following 7 things, and I think they're fascinating. Number 1, use praise lavishly. And I think this fits really well with what you've just been talking about. Praise for students, they say, may be seen as affirming and positive, but a number of studies suggest that the wrong kinds of praise can be very harmful to learning. For example, Dweck, 1999, Hattie, 2007. Stipek, 2010, argues that praise that is meant to be encouraging and protective of low-attaining students actually conveys a message of the teacher's low expectations. Children whose failure, they are talking in a school's context, children whose failure was responded to with sympathy were more likely to attribute their lack of failure to ability than those who were presented with a more negative reaction. And they go on, much along the lines that you've described. Number 2, for which there's no evidence, allow learners to discover key ideas for themselves. They say, enthusiasm for discovery learning is not supported by research evidence, which broadly favours direct instruction. Kirshner et al. 2006. Although learners do need to build new understanding on what they already know, your neural networks, if teachers want them to learn new ideas, knowledge or methods, they do need to generally teach them directly. I have a little cartoon next to my desk, which some people love and some people get really annoyed by. It's a picture of a guy, he's a carpentry student, and he's got in his hand a power drill, and he's using the wrong end of the power drill to bash in a nail into the wood. And behind him there are two tutors, and one of them is saying to the other, "Shall we tell him about the hammer?" And the other one's saying, "No, he's got to discover it for himself." Number 3, for which there's no or very, very weak evidence, group learners by ability. Evidence on the effects of grouping by ability, either by allocating students to different classes or to within-class groups, suggests that it makes very little difference to learning outcomes. I think that's really important, perhaps more in a schools context than in an FE context, but I've met many, many teachers who think it's just absolutely common sense that grouping by ability is beneficial for both high achievers, mid achievers and low achievers. The evidence does not support that. Number 4, encourage rereading and highlighting to memorize key ideas. Rereading and highlighting are the commonest and apparently most obvious ways to memorize the revised material. They also give a satisfying, but deceptive, feeling of fluency and familiarity with the material. However, a range of studies has shown that testing yourself, trying to generate answers, and other strategies are more effective. Okay. The next one is very interesting, and I've talked to, this is often a topic when I visit colleges, especially in the context of maths and English GCSE resets. It's this one: address issues of confidence and low aspirations before you try to teach content. They say teachers who are confronted with poor motivation and confidence of low attaining students may interpret this as the cause of their low attainment, and assume that it's both necessary and possible to address their motivation before attempting to teach them new material. In fact, the evidence shows that attempts to enhance motivation in this way are unlikely to achieve that end, and even if they do, the impact on subsequent learning is close to zero. In fact, the poor motivation of low attainers is a logical response to repeated failure. Start getting them to succeed, and their motivation and confidence should increase. Sounds obvious when you say it, but that's often not the practice. 2 more. Number 6 is present. Well, you've done this one. Number 6 is present information to learners in their preferred learning style. A belief in the importance of learning styles seems persistent, they say, despite the prominence of critiques of this kind of advice. And you mentioned Frank Coffield as a leading light on this. A recent survey, though, this is really depressing, found that over 90% of teachers in several countries, including the UK, agreed with the claim that individuals learn better when they receive information in their preferred learning style, for example, visual, auditory, kinesthetic. A number of writers have tried to account for its enduring popularity, but the psychological evidence is clear. There are no benefits for learning from trying to present information to learners in their preferred learning style. I will definitely put my hand up on that one. You know, I was presented with learning styles as if it were true. I used it in the classroom. I was merrily asserting until even a few years ago that I had met someone who was definitely a kinesthetic learner, you know, and I was taking that into account with, you know, how I presented things. It wasn't a learner, it was a minister, but he couldn't sit still when I was talking to him. I was like, he's a kinesthetic learner, all the signs. Number 7, I won't say who it was. Number 7, last one. Ensure learners are always active rather than listening passively if you want them to remember. This claim is commonly presented in the form of a learning pyramid. You ever seen that? I've seen it. A learning pyramid which shows precise percentages of material that will be retained when different levels of activity are employed. These percentages have no empirical basis and are pure fiction. Memory is the residue of thought, Willingham 2008. If you want students to remember something, you have to get them to think about it, but this might be achieved by being active or passive. 7 things to stop doing if you're doing them, or maybe not stop doing, but at least carry on doing them in the knowledge that you're sailing out into the unknown because the evidence doesn't support you. Nobody has all the answers to what is great teaching. Nobody here today, certainly not Professor Coe, he wouldn't claim that. Certainly not the Education and Training Foundation. But to be great teachers, you have to go to the evidence all the time and keep going back to it. Not just reading the evidence, but applying the evidence in your own practice, reflecting on what it means in your context, and challenging the evidence. You know, maybe one of these 7 things you think really does work for you. That's interesting. Why? Can you build on that? Do colleagues have the same experience? Is it replicable? It's not just using research evidence, but creating research evidence. Education Training Foundation believes very strongly that a mark of a mature, confident profession is one which not only uses evidence, but co-creates evidence. We don't have the answers to excellence or outstanding teaching, learning and assessment. We want to support everybody's quest towards it, but the answers will be where they always have been, which is with you, the practitioners. Thank you very much indeed.